Hi, everybody, and welcome today to the final in our Digital Preservation Services webinar series. There were 4 parts, and this is our retry at part 3. I want to extend my thanks to Mary Molinaro, the Executive Director of the Digital Preservation Network, for agreeing to this in the first place, and then for doing it a second time after technical difficulties got in the way last time. I'm just going to give a couple of intro slides, and then Mary's going to talk for about 20 minutes. At the end of that 20 minutes, you'll be able to ask any questions that you have in the chat, and we will both do our best to answer you. Of course, this, just like all the others, will be available afterwards. So far, we have done 30 minutes each with open Q&A for overview of digital preservation services at TDL, which was me, DuraSpace's Heather Greer-Klein on DuraCloud, and Chronopolis's Sybil Schaefer on Chronopolis. All of those slides are available in the TDL repository online, and you can also find videos of those sessions, which include the Q&A, on the TDL YouTube channel with the links all here. And today's will be the same. So today we've got Mary Molinaro, and I just want to refresh everyone's memory one more time on the role that Deepin plays in our digital preservation services. So if you're a digital preservation services user, you would put your content up into your TDL DuraCloud space. And then if you had chosen the Digital Preservation Network, or Deepin, as one of your storage providers, then it would be sent off to Deepin via that DuraCloud interface. A reminder that our other 2 options, of course, are Chronopolis and the 2 Amazon Web Services, S3 or Glacier. So with that, I am going to hand it over gratefully to Mary Molinaro. Thanks, Mary.
Hey there. Let me see here. I'm trying to share my screen, but it's not doing it.
It had to wait probably for me to stop.
Okay, here we go. There you go. Can you see it, my slides?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks so much, Courtney, and my apologies for the technical difficulties last time. So hopefully we'll do better this time. And I'm calling in via phone, so if somehow my network connection goes down or something goes wrong, somebody can say, hey, Mary, because I didn't really realize it till at the end with the questions. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk about Deepin to all of you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's at stake with digital preservation generally, how Deepin got started and the kind of things that we're looking at, and then what really is the next chapter, as we look ahead. I don't think anybody can say this enough times, but without preservation, all of your activities and efforts to make content available are at risk. And this is something I say over and over. I've been to many digital preservation kind of things at ALA and they talk about access, but not really what's at stake if you don't preserve things properly. All the work in digitizing and making available and doing all the metadata, that really is at risk if you don't really address digital preservation properly. As we think about our collections in libraries, as we've got things in our special collections that are really, really old, and the newer that the media is, the more fragile it is. So when we think about our collections, things that we've digitized, where we actually have the originals in our special collections, those are really less at risk than those born digital collections that, this magnetic tape, CDs, discs, flash, it's all got a very short shelf life. And, benign neglect, sitting something on the shelf and hoping that you get to preserve it, or get to process it later, as we have done with boxes of archival collections in the past, it's just not good enough. So it really requires some kind of an active participation. Now, when we think about, here's an example, the Rosetta Stone. It's sitting in the British Library, and it is old. It is very old. And it's there, and it's going to be there. A lot would have to happen for that to go away, although it looks a bit chipped around the edges. and here's an example. I live in Mexico, and here's, an example of something that, is going to be persistent for a long time. Our collections hold things like, rare books and vellum, that kind of thing. Newspaper collections, things on microfilm. And then when we get to the digital media, it's more and more fragile. So how will we make sure that these things are available to scholars in the future? And that's really the premise of Deepen, is moving our content and making sure it's available to our future scholars, to those people 20, 30, 50 years down the road. The things that we have to really think about are protecting against include natural disasters, of course, technology failure, and the one thing that many preservation solutions don't really address is institutional failure. What happens if your institution goes out of business, or you just lose interest, or you don't have the funding to continue things? That institutional failure to make sure that those things persist. And as Deepen got started about 5 years ago, a group of library deans and CIOs realized that there was a problem, and that even though we were doing a lot to preserve things, and we thought we were doing a lot, only a fraction of what should be preserved is being preserved. And so they thought, what would that look like? What would a solution look like that would make that ensure those things continue on into the future? So as they started thinking about designing this robust solution that became Deepen, here are the characteristics that really drove that, being having the content geographically distributed, so it's not all in one place, that content is replicated, that it's checked for fixity and repaired if for some reason one of the copies goes bad. And having that technological diversity, the idea was that you would have various repository infrastructures with different kinds of technology behind them, different kinds of storage systems, different kinds of repository infrastructure, and that diversity, that heterogeneity among repositories is also another insurance policy, and that those repositories would really meet best practices for repositories. And then underpinning that all with succession agreements, that deposit agreement that we ask our members to sign, saying if you lose interest in it, or if you cannot take ownership of this content, you give permission for Deepen to find a home for that in the community, and to make sure that that continues on forward in time. And so these are what the underpinnings of what really started the whole notion and premise of Deepen. So it really started with nothing but that big idea. And we brought together groups of technologists to kind of hash things out. And 60 universities stepped up and said that they would provide that financial support. And that initial financial investment required them to commit to $20,000 a year for 3 years to start. And that funded that research and development, and to start an endowed fund that would then persist and keep that content moving forward over time and make sure that it's there. So here's our business model, is that you pay up front for this first iteration of Deepen, and that's what you all are eligible to participate in by virtue of the fact that you're members of the TDL, is that its content is paid for upfront, and then we make a commitment to preserve that for at least 20 years. And the funds that are part of that fund is invested, and we use the earnings from those endowed funds to pay for that long-term preservation. So if for instance, many preservation systems, you have to pay an annual fee. And if you stop paying that annual fee, your content is deleted. And that really goes kind of flies in the face of the whole premise of Deepen is that if an institution is unable to pay, we want to make sure that that content persists over time. And the technical design, here is some of the qualities of the technical design of that endowed model, is that the Deepen nodes are located in different regions around the country. Content is deposited into one node, and in your case, it would go through the TDL, and then it's registered and then replicated in at least 2 other nodes, and then checked regularly for fixity, and that's all by contract in the deposit agreements that you will sign. So here are the nodes. You see, these are the initial Deepen nodes: Hathi Trust, the Academic Preservation Trust, AP Trust, at the University of Virginia, Durham Cloud and Chronopolis, which Courtney mentioned. Stanford was involved in the initial design, and they still provide some quality control kinds of services and the like, but they're not an active replication node at this point, although that's very likely to be in the future. And then the Texas Preservation node there at the University of Texas. And so the challenges have been, we had to really kind of look at technical things, at legal cases, and at the business case. Those were the things that were really it took us several years to work through these things. It's a complicated kind of system, but we've got sort of the lawyers on board and technical staff, and made that business model and kind of made that work. As we developed the system, and as it got, we were opening it up for business, we thought that, naively thought that content would be flowing immediately. And as it turned out that it wasn't. And we discovered just by conversations with our members that at the local level, people weren't really sure about how to develop a workflow. And so we worked with AV Preserve and developed a curriculum. And so that's available. We made that available online to everybody. It's available from the Deepen website. And Courtney and I are in conversations with some folks at NEDCC about taking this and creating some face-to-face workshops and some online learning tools and the like from that curriculum. But this is the kind of thing that Deepen is working on. So this is the first thing that we wanted to do was really develop that distributed dark preservation supported by audit and succession. And that was that initial push for Deepen, and we did that. And so as we are moving forward in time, we're thinking about moving from developing infrastructure but to really addressing those biggest challenges of digital preservation. This is the size of collections that were sort of in that initial push with the endowed model, that 5 terabytes to 100 terabyte collections. We're really confident, and we know that that can work. That works pretty well. As we look forward, it's that over 100 terabyte collections up through petabyte level collections. We've got some institutions that have multi-petabyte collections. That is a bigger lift, and it's a harder thing to kind of sort out. But that's one thing that we know needs to happen for us to preserve that valuable content for the next generation of scholars. AV content, research data sets, and the like. So some of the issues for these large collections are like the sizes of deposits, just the bulk of those, data movement, moving data around at scale, the capacity of partners, and then the cost of preserving those large collections. We've got a service that we're working on with the University of Southern California for audio and moving image collections that will have multi-petabyte capacity and that long-term, low cost for long-term preservation. So we're hoping to unveil that sometime in early 2018. So as we move around the edges of that stack of use cases, that small collections are another thing that are a challenge. And I think it's going to be relationships with consortia like the TDL that helps us solve those kinds of issues with the smaller collections. Some of the issues with small collections are a lack of technical infrastructure at a local level. Some small libraries don't have dedicated staff for this, or a lack of training and cost. But I think, working in partnership with, entities like the TDL, we can start to pick away at those issues and work on solutions for that. I would like to see us be able to develop tools and hosted solutions, help with workflows, training, and reducing costs. But those are the kinds of things that I know Courtney's thinking about all the time. And so as I talk about preserving content, you think about its baby steps, moving from the creation of your materials up through a good preservation solution. So as you scan your documents, for instance, then you realize that you need to image to standards, and that makes it more secure. Use a naming convention and add the right kind of metadata. Saving master files in a place where they're backed up. Every kind of improvement you make moves things toward that preservation. Depositing in a repository like the TDL, and opposed to just doing backups at a local level. Having files in 3 geographic locations, testing the system to make sure it's working. So this is an example of how you can move forward incrementally. You don't have to do everything all at once, but as you improve your own local systems, you can move from that, things all over the map to an actual preservation solution. So the other kind of big digital preservation challenges include these kinds of things. Scalable and automated metadata collection. I've had some conversations with some folks about artificial intelligence and layering that on to collections to automatically extract metadata where it's not such a boutique kind of process. Format migration is one of those things that we've talked about and really haven't done a whole lot with that, and that's something that I think people will have a lot of interest in. Obviously containing costs for preserving massive collections, and then maintaining that focus. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, is not resting on our laurels and making sure that we retain that interest long term and continue to chip away at these issues. And again, I said this at the beginning, and I can't say it enough times, that without preservation, everything you do to make your content available, all that effort and all that money is at risk if it's not properly maintained. And so what really does it take for things to be sustainable over time? We have to always look at new models, new technologies, and again, not rest on our laurels and say, oh, we've designed this system, because it's going to take incremental improvements over time and continual improvements. We have to make sure that with Deepen, that nodes can come and go and that the whole system persists. We also, it's really important to bring members into and expand that member expertise and skills and bring everybody into the table. And then having a good board, and we do have a good board for Deepen. So I'm really happy about that and feel real fortunate about that with Deepen. And then that continued engagement, I think, is another thing. Creative solutions, really thinking about that. Resources is a huge thing with as an issue, because it's expensive and it takes as much focus on and allocation of resources. It's not a pay for it once and you're done. You have to have some kind of a continual way to pay for this, and then good partnerships. So then that is it. I will turn it back to Courtney. If there are questions, I'm happy to take questions. And, I appreciate all your attention. Thank you very much.
Mary, thank you so much. And you can keep that slide up for a minute if you want, so people can see your Twitter handle and the Deepen Twitter handle and your email address there, and where to find more information about Deepen. I will say too, while you're all typing your questions into chat, if you have any, I have very much enjoyed working with Deepen in these last, just over 6 months, I think now, 7 months. And for those of you who aren't aware, I'm currently the Texas Preservation Node Manager. So I work very closely with Mary and Dave Puller at Deepin. So any questions, go ahead and drop them into chat for us. And we'll just give you a second to do so. Mary, I'll ask you one thing while we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions. You mentioned much you're imagining 100 terabytes to the petabyte range. What kind of partners are you seeing as being representative of that kind of use case for Deepin?
You mean as members contributing content, or
yeah?
Well, I know some that I can think of right off the bat. Indiana University, as an example, has digitized or is in the process of digitizing all of their AV content on campus. And they have a huge music school and anthropology, oral history collections, those kinds of things. And they're going to have over 8 petabytes of content that needs to be preserved. And so that's the kind of thing that, there's a commitment there. And in fact, Indiana University is, the president is the chairman of our board. So that, he's very anxious for that content to go into Deepin to be preserved for the long term. Another use case that I can think of is the C-SPAN. One of the founders of Deepin is the chair of C-SPAN, and all of those videos of Congress. It has lasting value, and that scholars may want to look at that as a record of what has happened and to get a sense of that. And so you can imagine the size of that collection. We've also had conversations with WGBH at Boston on public television kind of content. So those are 3 examples of those big collections that there just isn't that capacity in a preservation solution yet at this point.
Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting. Thanks for that. I didn't know about the C-SPAN thing, actually. That's fascinating. And I imagine that would be a lot of video.
It's a lot of video, and it's a huge collection.
I'll ask another question since it's not, we don't have a lot of activity in the chat here because you gave us so much information. Thank you. I'm wondering, are we the only consortial member currently? Are you talking to other consortia about the type of membership that TDL has? Because it's very significant in how it's different from regular Deepin members.
Well, you are the only consortia that we have at this point. And I think it's a model for what other states might be interested in doing, but our board is currently looking at membership models and I think the TDL is an example. I worked with Christy. I think it was my first day on the job at Deepin. We had a conversation. We were in Vancouver, I believe, at some kind of a meeting, CNI or some kind of a meeting, and we had a conversation about what are the possibilities, and we could just kind of went through the hard work of just sort of organizing it and putting some thought to it. And so I think this is an example of what can happen. I think it's a really great example of a consortial membership. And so we really look to replicate that with other states, but we haven't done it so far.
Awesome. Well, I think everyone is tired on their Friday afternoon and are not summoning questions, but just so everybody knows, you can reach out to me at TDL, or you can reach out to Mary anytime you have further questions. This video will be available very soon after we close out today. And I just want to say thank you one more time, Mary. I really appreciate you doing this for us.
Thanks, and I'm glad my network connection held up this time. So we're
Me
all
too.
Good, so. Yeah. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.